Today's topic is going to be an interesting one. It's going to be more about developing critical thinking and why it might be essential in a ways that we kind of might sound like we are going against the grain and always challenging all these kind of things, but predominantly it comes from the place that there is not one thing that can be put in a system and is going to work for everyone 100%. So anyone who's serious about being healthy, they need to develop ability to challenge their own thoughts, their own beliefs, to get the best outcome out of them, out of whatever the hell they do. And if they need to go approach a doctor, maybe learn to ask the right questions. Maybe you can open up and define what the hell is critical thinking and why is it essential for guaranteeing the better outcome from whatever the hell we are trying to do when it's related to health, well-being, and generally just getting a higher quality of life.
Yeah, well, it has to do exactly with everything that we've talked about. Like the behaviors of people are dictated by environments, right? Like if you spend more time inside, you're going to have the lenience towards different behaviors than somebody spends more time outside. And not only that, the time of year affects that. So your local environment has the biggest effect on your biology. If anything that is, that's high level, very short sentence, everything that we've been talking about for years is your environment, both internal and external, dictates a lot more about how your biology functions than anything else. Which also means this, your information that you get from a health professional, or really any professional in any field, if it's coming from a centralized entity, meaning any three-letter agency, okay, then that behavior or that recommendation that they're trying to convince you to do is actually probably not the best thing that could happen to you, because they do not know all of the ins and the outs of your particular person, right? Like where do you live? What time of year is it? What age are you? They take a little bit of that into account, but very, very little, very, very little. That means that some health outcomes or some behavioral outcomes that they try to get you to do are actually counterproductive to your health. And the biggest thing that pops to mind, literally, is some of the recommendations that came from COVID, right? Like those recommendations, stay inside, don't go out into public, etc. All of these things actually made people sicker. Literally, we know all of that now in retrospect. Anybody who's actually hasn't ignored what's been going on for the last 4 years understands that the data has come out and understands that the literal recommendations, right? This is apart from the jab, apart from the actual injection, the actual recommendations that they were giving you made people sicker and more predisposed to get sick in the first place.
This is something I was looking into. I believe it was 1918 when they had this flu pandemic, and when people started to overflow hospitals, the people had to be put on a street, and those who were on a street actually started to recover. So we had this data that putting people in confined places is probably not the best idea, even if they are not, well, even worse if they are not ill. So telling somebody is to just sit at home and whatnot, yeah, challenging those beliefs is interesting. We don't seem to learn from history. We just bluntly follow whatever is put in front of us.
Yeah, we have previous pandemics to learn from. We have previous things, and then we also have previous data, right? Like on exactly what a coronavirus is. There is a reason why it's called a coronavirus. All coronaviruses act the same way. Why do you think the first year, right, 2020, started in March? Why do you think the first 3 or 4 months, which was summertime for most of the hemisphere, didn't really see that many cases, especially in northern countries like Sweden and things of that nature? The reason is because coronaviruses actually get blunted by solar energy. We know that by default. Like, that is a known scientific thing, actual science. What did they keep telling you? Oh, stay inside. Don't go outside. Make sure that you stay away from other people and stuff like that. Those literal recommendations made you sicker. Now let's get a little bit more deeper into what critical thinking, which is something that's starting to be called more and more decentralized thinking, right? Decentralized behavior, meaning people that lived in kind of like I don't want to say isolated places, but just smaller towns, right? Smaller towns actually did not experience COVID the same as people in cities. The reason for that is because those people tend to coordinate with their local people a lot more than they rely on the TV to tell them what to do, or anything like that. And so if you're in a local environment and most people are ignoring the recommendations purely because either they don't see it on TV or they literally just go, I'm not going to do that, and nobody's going to really stop me from doing that. A simple thing to assess is in smaller towns, there's usually like a slightly bigger town with like a centralized entity for food and stuff like that, like a Walmart, for example, right? That most people would know what that is, or a Costco. You went to one of those places, everybody was masked up. You went to any local grocery store, nobody's wearing any masks, right? And that happened everywhere in the US. Any small town like that, they didn't really obey any of those things, and they did not experience shutdowns or any of that type of stuff to the same degree that people in larger cities. Why? Because it is a mass behavioral thing, right? If a centralized entity, aka any three-letter agency, can get a certain amount, a percentage of a group in close proximity to other people, more and more of those people start to behave in that behavior. That's called centralized behavioral manipulation. Okay, so centralized information goes out, a small group of people and a large group of people start behaving in that certain way, and now all of a sudden a very large group of people behaves in that certain way. But there are pockets all around that don't govern that, and those are decentralized behavioral thinking people. The reason for that is because they choose different sources of information, and I don't mean CNN versus CNBC versus, I don't mean that. I mean, they get their information from their neighbor, from their other neighbor, and from that neighbor got it from another person in another town, and that neighbor. Or on social media, you're getting your information directly from people in other countries and not the media from that country or your own country, because that is a way to manipulate how you think. That is called centralized information gathering, which is you just sit in front of the TV or your phone and you get it from three-letter agencies. And decentralized behavior is assessing that point of view, right? That's still part of the point of view because you're not really going to be able to escape it. But then going a little bit further, doing a little bit of actual work, which is, hey, they're talking about this country in this certain way. Maybe I'll just reach out to some people on social media, because everybody has social media, and you just ask, hey, is somebody from this other country? And they, you'll probably be surprised that you have somebody in your social media group that is like, oh yeah, I live in that country. And then you ask them the straight up question that the media is trying to portray. And then oftentimes you will find that is 180 degrees the opposite. Or
this is something we both have noticed with Twitter. Only reason why I have Twitter account is because in university, my professor said, in Twitter, when before even the study is published, you can reach out to the person who's doing the study. Before it's published, they can send you a paper. Before they have to start charging for it, you can get an access to everything for free if you reach out personally. So I was lucky enough that I have kept in touch with my professors at university, and I can just reach out to them. And when all this started, I kind of messaged them, and every single person just said, whatever the hell you do, wait. Like, okay. But this is like...
a perfect example of that is on Twitter, right? There's actual scientists, just like you said. You can literally reach out to the actual scientists that are actually doing the data gathering, right? So, for example,
not the government, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Not the government, not the people that are going to curate the information, right? People don't understand that by the time information is put on centralized social media or centralized media, it's been curated. The things they don't want you to know gets pushed out of the way. The things they want you to know gets pushed in, and it gets modified, twisted a little bit. The statistics can be manipulated with some simple calculations and things of that nature. Now, to your point of this, we now know that if you got the COVID vaccine that had an mRNA messenger vaccine, so that's Pfizer and Moderna, that you are now officially genetically modified. That is known information that has come out this year because an actual scientist, his name is Kevin McKernan, he went and got the preprint information from Pfizer directly, right? Pfizer and Moderna directly. This is information that did not make it to the public. This is information in the preprints. In that information, it shows that genetic material at about anywhere from 10 to 30%, depending on the individual in those studies, was being leaked from the mRNA vaccine into genetic genome of them. In other words, you've had genetic modification done to you if you've had the COVID vaccine. Now, if all of the information was presented to you, in other words, you would have gone to anybody that read the preprint information or got the preprint information yourself, you would have known that. But you didn't, or most people didn't, right? And I'm not saying that I did or didn't. I'm saying, just like you, I reached out to actual scientists. Hey, what do you think about what's going on with mRNA vaccines and stuff like that? And just like you said, hey, it sounds cool. I would wait, right? Like, there are things that can go wrong here. Just wait. So immediately right there, I just said, okay, well, that's not for me, right? That's not for me or anybody that I know or anybody that I care about. I made that decision literally within the first month of those coming out. Instead of relying solely on the talking heads in social media, in centralized information dissipation of saying, oh no, these are going to be 100% effective and safe. That was literally the tune that got preached for the first year. 100% effective and safe, 100% effective, and literally over and over and over and over again. And then it went from, oh, these are 90% effective and safe, to 80% effective and safe, all the way down to, I don't know what they finally started saying, like 50% or something like that. So
it was below 30 at one point, and now they stopped saying that because obviously AstraZeneca has been taken down because of heart attacks and whatnot. But how does this challenge in your way of thinking and the information you being put out to believe in, how does this relate to health? So how do you evaluate better what is a good kind of advice for you and which one isn't? So where do you even start? Because more often than not, you are so busy, you just don't want to think about anything. You're like, I believe these people telling me the right thing. And more often than not, those doctors believe that they are telling you the right thing as well. It's not like they're like,
right, because they're getting their information directly from an algorithm, directly from a centralized, and that's what I mean, right? This is one thing that you can assess immediately. You ask the doctor, how do you come up with that recommendation? Literally, is that an algorithm that you're following? Right? That's literally question number one when it comes to, you have a health issue and you go to a doctor. Great. Listen to what they have to say, but then ask them directly, how did you come up with that information? Right? Just like you said in previous.
And before you carry on, I will just give an example, because when I first did my blood test, my doctor said, you have kidney failure. And I'm like, what do you mean kidney failure? Or your creatinine is through the roof. And my coach at the time, Soviet Union coach, he already knew that it's going to be like that. He's like, if your creatinine is normal, you're not training hard enough. And I'm like, let me come back 3 days later and retest everything. We came back and everything's fine. She's like, it's a miracle. What did you do? I'm like, let's just leave the blood test reading to my coach because you clearly don't understand what you're doing.
Yeah, because it's an algorithm, right? Because just like because if you would have asked him directly, how did you come up with that thing? And he would have said, oh, I have this documentation or this learning event or this class that I took or whatever it is. And if your creatinine is above this level, this is what it is. Cause, effect.
Yeah. Well, she just took a book out of a shelf and never asked me any questions. But my coach already said, if your creatinine is low, we are not pushing you hard enough.
Yeah, exactly. So exactly what you said right there. She took the information out of a book, right? And that information in that book came from well-meaning studies, but the studies aren't you, right? So that immediately tells, what if there would have been which there are now, there are medications for kidney disease. What if she goes, oh man, you're in kidney failure, here's this medication, right?
She wanted to send me to the hospital.
Yeah, exactly. So that medication, all medications, come with side effects. So if you would have, been at this day and age, I guarantee you, if they would have legitimately thought that you had kidney failure, you would have got some kind of medication. You would have started taking it, and then you would have other problems, right? Because the assessment was incorrect. There was no decentralized assessment behavior. Decentralized meaning there's an individual and there's individual circumstances for this individual that need to be taken into account to properly assess the actual outcome. Things that we've talked about. You need to properly assess somebody. Where exactly are they? Meaning, their internal environment, their external environment, and then and only then can you properly make the actual judgment of what does this person need from blood work, right? That's actual decentralized critical thinking, right? Versus centralized, where you look at a certain outcome and there's a certain, oh, yes, no, if this, then that, if this, then that, cause and effect. And people will get mad at me at this, but there is no such thing as cause and effect on this planet. The reason why is because everything is based on probabilities, right? The probability of me living tomorrow is quite high, but I could still get on the road and die, right? Like, there's nothing guaranteed. There is no cause and effect. Just because I wear my seatbelt doesn't mean I'll survive a car crash. It's a probability that will make it higher, right? That I survive. But there's no guarantees. Same thing as, hey, if I train with weights really, really, really hard all the time, the probability is quite high that I'll build a lot of muscle tissue. But we all know people that can train really freaking hard, and they just aren't genetically good responders to that. Their probabilities are significantly lower. There is no cause and effect in here. Same thing with calories, right? We had that great episode on calories where, hey, if you eat in this level of calorie deficit, you are going to lose body fat. That is not a guarantee, and that is not a cause and effect. I don't care what anybody's PhDs behind their name. Calories in and calories out is not the end all be all, because calories aren't the same, because the probabilities shift depending on the calories, depending on you as the individual and the time of year that you eat them in, or the external environment, right? That is true decentralized thinking versus centralized thinking. Centralized thinking is cause and effect. Do this, that will happen. That's not true on this planet.
What do you think about barriers to critical thinking? Because we know there's a lot of peer pressure. A lot of people did whatever they did because their family were saying them, hey, you need to do this because of that and this, or maybe some like cognitive biases that they have this strong belief this matters and whatnot. So how would you overcome peer pressure, for example? What?
Yeah, well, and that's one of the things where you have to be solid in getting lots of different information. And peer pressure is hard. Like, peer pressure is hard, but there's got to be, number one, I would have to say this: confidence. Confidence in yourself. Confidence in that you are actually going out of your way to do some work, right? People that don't do the work of like figuring out some form of different information gathering or actual making human connections, right? Actual physical human connections with other people locally in their environment, they are not as confident in themselves, right? Because they are relying on that or this, right, to give them the confidence or the information to go about their daily lives and things of that nature. Doing what I'm doing right now, right? We've had an episode on, hey, just being outside, even if it's cold or even if it's really, really hot outside, doing even mildly hard things that don't seem physical in nature will automatically augment your capability for willpower. Willpower and confidence, both of those combined, are the simplest way to continue to augment you being not governable, right? Not being able to be peer pressured by mass, right? It's having the confidence in yourself and the willpower in yourself. And I feel like willpower and confidence are very tied together to the individual. And those are directly related to neurotransmitters that get produced with daylight exposure and with doing hard things. It doesn't necessarily have to involve the gym, but the gym is a great way to do that, right? To elicit good willpower and train good willpower. But it can start with simple things. Like we had an episode with just taking a morning walk, even though people do not like to take a morning walk. Like, sure, if you live at the equator or in Florida, it's very simple, right? Like, it's like, oh, okay, I'm just going to go outside. It's nice weather pretty much all the time. But that's very that's not most of the people on the planet, right? Most of the people on the planet going outside in the morning and going for a walk is actually kind of a willpower thing, right?
And so especially if you live in a city when that walk outside is not nice anymore.
Exactly, right. So now you're executing your willpower, you're training willpower, and you're training confidence in yourself. Confidence that you can actually do the thing that you told yourself. Because see, everybody like can listen to this and be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I should do that, right? I should do that. And then you're saying that to yourself, but then every day that you don't do that, you're eroding your confidence. right? So you're actually making yourself less confident. Whenever you hear something and it clearly clicks with you and you're like, that's actually a really good thing, I should definitely do that. And every day that you don't do that, you're actually eroding your own confidence, right? Every day that you do that, you are actually growing your confidence. Once you, and again, it's not like one of those things where it goes away, right? It's just like, hey, after a few months of doing that, your confidence has grown that, hey, even if you miss a day because of travel or whatever, or even a week, no big deal. You have enough confidence in yourself that you'll just jump right back on, right? It's kind of like when we've been training forever, right? Hey, if I take a month off because of extenuous circumstances, no big deal. I'll just get back to training when I know that I can, right? And your confidence doesn't get eroded at that time.
Confidence, so you probably have maturity as well to not try to match your lifts to the ones you had before you kind of
Yeah. In a training related scenario, exactly right. Going back to training, I'm not going to be, moving the same weight or doing the same thing when I start up again. But that's not the point, right? That's not the point. The point is physically getting back into the right habits, because habits make the individual.
So have you got any practical strategies for somebody to develop critical thinking or whatever? So for me, example, I was extremely born into like a socialist context and being exposed to different languages very early on, and also family being more or less bilingual. So I could read in multiple languages and I could get an opinion from different countries on same exact topic and see that everyone is trying to paint the same exact event completely different. So that's when it started to tick in my head, like there is more to it, And my mom always used to say, believe nothing you hear and only half of what you actually see. So what would be your recommendations to kind of develop and critical thinking through some practical, maybe games, tasks, whatever. Maybe pick up a history book about World War One from, I don't know, go to the library and read the Russian side and then read someone else's side. What would be your kind of things?
So what you're talking about is finding examples, right? And that can be done with anything, right? Like literally just go back in history, just like you said, read history. That is finding the examples, seeing how they get manipulated, et cetera, et cetera. Those are reinforcing that you're being manipulated, right? And that's good, right? But here is uniquely from a biological perspective, how to increase confidence in critical thinking and, more importantly, patterns, right? Because you have to see that have repeated over the course of history in order to be good at detecting it in the future. What is the major neurotransmitter in pattern recognition? Dopamine. Right. This is the pattern that we use to do pattern recognition. And not only pattern recognition, but pattern creation. In other words, a lot of people don't know this, but when you are conceived, it goes like this. There's an egg, and it has the mother's genetic material and their mitochondria, and then just the sperm. And then when the sperm enters the egg, we know that a light show happens, right? This has recently been recorded. It actually makes light, right? Like the sun would. Okay.
I'll record that. Never mind.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know how they did that, but they have it on video in a scientific lab that they did that. Okay. And what they found out is that the egg is chock full of dopamine. This is a fertile egg, by the way. Fertile egg, chock full of dopamine, chock full of melanin. The melanin gets destroyed to create the light, and the dopamine makes the cells create patterns. What's the first pattern that the system is going to create? The nervous system. We know that the first thing that gets made as insemination happens is the creation of the brain and the nervous system and the skin. Okay. That is done solely by dopamine, because dopamine is a future pattern creation machine and also allowing you to detect patterns to begin with. So, low-hanging fruit, very low-hanging fruit. Make sure that your DHEA omega-3 index content is high. So, if you take an omega-3 index test, which is just a finger prick, and your omega-3 index is somewhere around 8% or higher, you're in a good spot. Most people do not have it that high. And we've talked about this in the nutritional part of things. But this nutritional part of things, especially this concept, allows you to gather more electrons. The more electrons you make, the more dopamine you're going to be able to make, because dopamine comes from the creation of melanin, right? So In order to make melanin, you need to be able to collect electrons from the sun. And that gets hugely augmented by DHA. Now, let's take it a step further. The machine that's using pattern recognition on your body is your brain, right? Well, that's undisputed. Your brain is what's doing that work. Your brain has about 30 to 40% of the body's DHA in it. The reason why is because the brain is an electrical computer, right? And in order to facilitate very fast synapses and calculations, reaction times, all of that type of stuff, you need a very electrically conductive material. What is the most electrically conductive material in biological sense? That's DHA. That has been unmodified in the nervous system of all living creatures for billions of years. Not once, not one creature on this planet that's ever existed or is going to exist is going to not use DHA for nervous system creation. The reason for that is because it has the highest fidelity for augmenting all of the electrical processes in the body. That includes the creation of dopamine as long as you get outside in sunlight. So the combination of literally, what am I saying with all this complicated words is eat a bunch of seafood, sit outside in the sun. That's literally that is as low hanging fruit as it gets and as simple behavior as I can say it, that will dramatically increase dopamine and neurotransmitters for being able to recognize patterns. Once you're able to recognize patterns, you become less governable because you can't be manipulated as easy when the reoccurring pattern comes back up. The reoccurring pattern of, in this case, we're talking about manipulation of centralized entities and things of that nature.
So it almost brings me to the kind of conclusions that the less fatigued your brain is, the more capability of critical thinking you will have, which means probably eat better food choices that doesn't cause inflammation in your body, in your brain, whatever. Try to be as fit and as healthy as you physically can. And that's maybe 1/3 of a battle already won. And with actual thinkings and do actual, maybe sit down with your friends and talking about same exact topic and trying to understand why the hell are we thinking completely different about this one thing, and try to get to some kind of mutual understanding about, okay, I formed this opinion based on this, you formed this opinion based on that. Is there maybe something that we can conclude that is overall, yeah, okay, this is what we agree on, or whatever. But it feels like there is a
and I wouldn't even say agree upon, right? Because the whole point of decentralized thinking is that there is disagreements, right? Because at the end of the day, you're the only person that can make the decision for yourself, right? Even amongst family members, I know families that, hey, the father got vaccinated or vice versa, the mother got vaccinated and the rest of the family didn't, right? So you almost can't even say that it's about agreements. It's more about just getting more information from different sources, right? And when I mean that from different sources of people. I do not mean that from different centralized three-letter agencies. You know, you're getting your information from CNN versus CNBC versus I don't know what's in Europe as far as other three-letter media agencies, but the point being, other people. Get other people's information to make assessments about your life, right? Now, a lot of people already do that, right? I'm not saying that this is a problem with everybody, but a lot of people already did it, and I know a lot of people, and you probably know a lot of people, that we're split on this exact topic, which is why we're using it, right? We know, I would say, in my circle of people, right, that I either associate personally or know on social media, I would say 90% of the people are not vaccinated, right? So in my personal group, it's a very decentralized thinking group. Now, you need to make that assessment. This is a perfect heuristic, right? Who complied and who did not? Who got manipulated and who didn't? You need to assess that. You need to, I'm literally telling people, you need to assess who in your personal life, either known directly in person or through social media, are the people that complied and didn't comply. And that immediately starts to tell you more about how they think, decentralized or not, as far as critical thinking goes. Now, you also have to have a little bit of caveat in there, because there was a lot of deception on purpose, right? Like, not like we have to understand that the whole concept that happened over the last 4 years was mass deception on the whole planet, right? And so you also have to give them a little bit of a grain of salt on okay, how, why, for example, was it their job that required them to get the COVID vaccine? Well, that's slightly different than somebody who volunteered for it, right? But so there's again a little bit of decentralized thinking that has to go into that assessment as far as your personal group, but that is the whole concept of decentralized thinking. There is no cause and effect. You cannot just put somebody in one column or a certain procedure in one column of yes, good, yes, bad, right? And all of those types of things. For example, Johnson & Johnson. Johnson & Johnson made a vaccine that was not mRNA. That would have been a perfectly viable vaccine for most people to have some kind of an effect on it and would not have had the same consequences. Johnson & Johnson did not choose to go down the mRNA vaccine. And coincidentally, that vaccine did not get pushed by the media outlets, right? They didn't give you a choice. They said, oh, it's Pfizer or Moderna, Pfizer or Moderna. Very few people knew that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was available, except for example, I have some older in-laws, right? My wife's parents, and they were concerned and they wanted to get a vaccine, and they asked me directly, hey, what do you think of this? And I told them directly, and they're like, okay, so if I get a vaccine, don't get the mRNA vaccine. I'm like, yeah, so that means don't get the Pfizer, don't get the Moderna. If you really want a vaccine, maybe a Johnson & Johnson. And they're like, oh, why is that? I'm like, because it's not mRNA vaccine. And guess what they did? They got the Johnson & Johnson. Did they get sick? No, they didn't. Did they have any of the problems that we know that people are having with the mRNA vaccines? No, they didn't. I'm not saying that was the perfect answer for everybody, but I'm saying it was a second option that didn't get put on the table because there's a narrative being pushed from a centralized media outlet.
Yeah, that's a very deep level of thinking about like, hey, do I do this, do I do that, and which one should I choose? It's like, yeah, it's overwhelming, and not many people would ever even go that route. But same with health, like, hey, which diet is better and which training approach is better, and you need to sit down and kind of start analyzing why is that person giving you this advice.
Yeah.
Like I will never tell everyone just eat greens. I'm like, not because, well, first of all, I don't really agree with that from perspective of science. There are no amount of greens you can eat to get all the supplements you need. It's just not going to happen. That's why most of them will have to supplement with something. We're just not all built like that.
Yeah, there's very few places on the planet that will allow you to do that. That, just like you said, it isn't that they can't. It's just that most won't be able to execute that to have the best biological outcome. But there are certain people on this planet where the answer is yes, you probably can get away with that. For example, people living in India, right at the equator, it straddles the equator, it has a lot of sunlight. If they spend a lot of time outside, avoid being indoors all the time, that sort of stuff. Not necessarily avoid, but just the lifestyle that they have there. Those people are going to get away with almost a pure vegan diet versus other people on the planet. There are other sections on the planet, environmentally speaking, that will probably allow that. Yeah. But the moment you go, hey, this is good for this population, and then you apply it to yourself living in Canada, for example, well, you're going to find out very damn quickly, and by very damn quickly, within a year, right? Within a year, you're going to find pretty damn quick that, hey, this kind of isn't panning out for me. I need to reassess, right? Now, hopefully you've been watching some of these episodes and you can reassess correctly, right?
To me, it reminds me, I was watching this documentary, more or less, about tribes in Siberia, and they were asking about what do you eat, and they're like, what do you mean what we eat? We eat what we catch. And how about people who don't want to eat flesh? They're like, well, they die because there's nothing else to eat here.
That's literally true, right? Like that is called nature's decentralized web, right? Everything in nature, everything on this planet, right? We're the only species that thinks in a way of, hey, what can we do to make our life better? No one else on this planet behaves in that behavior, right? Everybody behaves in, what does this local environment provide? And guess what used to happen? When this local environment couldn't provide any sustenance, you didn't stay there. You moved, right? You have to understand that is how nature has programmed everything on this planet, which is kind of the concept that we've alluded to and vaguely said in some episodes is, hey, sometimes we look at health markers on blood work and we go, or I go for sure, and you have too on some of these, where it's like, dude, your environment is killing you. You need to move. You need to do something to change your environment. And that is the same concept as, hey, this environment is not providing sustenance, and you move to an environment that does provide sustenance. Luckily for us,
definitely changed through years as well. The more we progress and the more we see patterns and all these kind of things, we can kind of develop better strategies to help others as well.
yes, 100%. And this goes back to the dopamine and pattern recognition things where you don't need a study to recognize a pattern, right? You don't need a peer-reviewed study or a meta-analysis to confirm a pattern for you, right? When you see a pattern, it is very night and day. In fact, it's one of the earliest things of cognitive development in a child, right? If they don't recognize patterns, that's a problem, right? That's at 2 years old, right? At 2 years old, a child should be able to clearly recognize patterns, whether that's colors, sequences of shapes, etc. That is a heuristic test. If you are not able to, if you're not actively always thinking in patterns and recognition of patterns, you are failing yourself as of developing this supercomputer right here.
Talking about patterns, I'm in a place now where Wi-Fi is very poor and it works only in 1-2 rooms, and the bedroom is the furthest room away from Wi-Fi router. And lo and behold, I have the best sleep.
Yeah. It's
not
not
even
it's
need
not a
to take
coincidence.
my EMF meter out just to know that.
At some point you just recognize the pattern, and you don't even need the device to confirm your pattern recognition. You just know. You're just like, okay, well, I'm going to sleep over there. I already know that that's going to be better, right? You've already recognized the pattern, reconfirmed it yourself with actual outcomes with your own body. That is true decentralized thinking, right? Whereas somebody who is central, they won't even think about the right questions, right? That is actually the right way to frame that. When you are a decentralized thinker, when you are a decentralized person and critical thinker, you are consistently asking the right questions. It doesn't mean you're always coming up with the right answers, because you may get the wrong answer, and then you reassess and ask the right question again, and then you course correct. That's the difference. A centralized person will do the thing and expect the thing to happen correctly, and if it doesn't happen correctly, they just do it more. Yeah. Right? They just continue to hammer it and hammer it and hammer it. And next thing you know, they're just spinning their wheels or getting worse outcomes, etc. And they're not actually asking the right questions, right? They're either not asking the right people anymore, or they're not asking themselves the right questions. Whereas a decentralized thinker, they're literally going to go and ask different people different questions and continue to ask the right questions. That is the true definition of I'm a critical thinker, is you're consistently asking the right questions. And if you ask a question and you get an answer and you execute on it, right? But there's another part to that, right? The execution part, right? The difference between you and the little scenario you just said about the Wi-Fi router is that you actually execute on it, right? The main thing is execute on the actual thinking of, once you recognize the pattern, you have to still do the action.
Yeah. No, this was awesome, David, as usual. Appreciate your time, and we'll catch up in next video.
Awesome, man. Thank you.